Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBOM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBOM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the MBOM podcast. I am so grateful that you've decided to join me for today's episode of the show. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Offering Tree. Offering Tree is your one-stop shop as a yoga teacher for all things website, email newsletter, scheduling, payments, and more. One of the things I love about Offering Tree is that they're consistently adding new features to their platform, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the episode. And today on the podcast, I am joined by Nicholas Hurd, otherwise known as Quazzy. I am so excited to share this conversation with you that I had with Quazzy. Quazzy is a yoga teacher as well as the founder of Running River Collective, and he uses both audio and video to create yoga and meditations to share with his community. He brings a refreshing, down-to-earth voice to a heavily whitewashed wellness industry, and part of his mission is to bring the practices he's learned in boutique yoga spaces to the Black and Brown communities that he passionately advocates for. And on this episode of the podcast, we talk about his journey with yoga, what it's like being a yoga teacher in New York City. We talk about equity and equality in yoga studios, and we talk about how to make yoga studios and classes more accessible to our BIPOC communities. And this is a really important conversation for us yoga teachers to be having, especially white yoga teachers like myself. This was a really informative episode for me. I was able to dive deep with Quazzy and learn a little bit from him while having a really necessary conversation about what needs to change in the industry. And this has been a conversation that has been a long time coming and has really been brought to the forefront with the Black Lives Matter movement that came to a head at the beginning of June. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation. I hope that it's informative for you. And of course, if you have anything to add to the conversation, please make sure you let me know. All right, I hope that you enjoy this episode. And without further ado, here is Quazzy. Quazzy, welcome to the podcast today. I'm super excited to have you here with me.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this conversation and everything we're going to chat about today. And first question for you is, where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you live from Brooklyn, New York.
Amazing. And how are things in New York right now?
I think they're on some spectrum of where how most of the world's doing. I've been at home for 200 days or something like that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's a lot of days at home, but it sounds like, things are going well overall. So I guess that's what really matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I'm really excited to dive into Running River Collective and all the work that you do in the yoga space. But before we get there, can you tell us a little bit about how you first got into yoga and your yoga story?
For sure. I first got into yoga in 2011. I'm originally from Michigan, and I came here with film dreams, a film pursuit. I was looking to be somewhere between the next Spike Lee and the character Gordo from Lizzie McGuire. I don't know who's listening to this knows Lizzie McGuire, but her best friend had a camera, and I thought that was cool. And where I'm from in Michigan, it's a different pace than New York. So just along with kind of getting swept up in the hustle and bustle of the city, and just the hours I was working, being in school full time, figuring out this film career, I just found a lot of physical and mental. There's a physical and mental toll, I guess you would say. And I found yoga, and it was this new way to express myself. I hadn't been able to play too many sports when I moved to New York, so just having this new outlet to both be physically active, but then finding these meditative qualities to it really put me at ease. Really put me in a better state to do everything I was doing. And just kind of messed around and made it a full-time thing in 2014.
Amazing. And what was it about the practice that kind of drew you into wanting to teach?
It was something about, everybody being in the same posture, but allowed to be a little bit different. And the sense of no competition, I guess. I found New York to be a very competitive place, which I'm all for. But just to have this hour to 90 minutes where there was no competition, the only frame of reference was my own internal self, was really comforting to both my self-esteem and just how I navigate through space.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds awesome. I can definitely relate to that as well. And so as you decided to dive into teaching, were you still pursuing film as well?
Yeah, for sure. I was juggling the two, and it was working out fine. When it got to a point where teaching an hour of yoga, maybe two every day, was a lot more enticing than holding a boom pole on set for 12 hours. So I just kind of made the switch somewhere since when I really got into teaching, really got in the swing of teaching.
Yeah, yeah, that definitely makes sense to me. I think, yeah, I've never held a boom pole, but I imagine that they're heavy and awkward. So I feel like 2 hours of teaching is definitely better than 12 hours of doing that.
There's a yoga pose in itself to do, but I'll take sitting down teaching any day.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And then, so at what point did you create or co create Running River Collective?
Oh, very recently, very recently. So I had been teaching in studios across New York, been teaching, meditation, different types of yoga, just, perfecting the craft, as we do. And I guess it was the start of this year. Well, actually, it was somewhere in the spring of last year. My significant other was starting they were writing a grant that was centered around educating men about ways they can, just be better people. Honestly, the whole thing was around kind of reducing sexual violence in communities and just bringing, I guess, awareness to toxic masculinity, and they wanted to have some type of meditation aspect. So I was like, hey, let me get on this grant, and we'll make this organization, and we came up with Running River Collective, and it was pretty dormant for a while. Just things kind of got busy, but ever since quarantine started, it really took over, and then the Black Lives Matter movement took over. It's been just needed, I guess. That space has been needed, and since we're working remote, the focus has been more about bringing healing to everyone, but really putting an emphasis on Black people being represented in that healing process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like this, Black Lives Matter is long overdue as a movement that's taken the globe. And it's really amazing that you guys have been able to be a part of this. And I'd be curious for listeners listening who aren't familiar with what you're doing at Running River Collective, what is the mission and what do you guys aim to do through the nonprofit?
The mission is cool enough. It's the same thing it's always been. It's to allow these spaces that I've been feeling very privileged to be a part of more accessible to the communities that I was not seeing represented in there. When we started, we were really excited to just offer some of these tools that have been so helpful. Have been priceless, honestly, and just making sure that everybody's getting a chance to be their best selves. But before quarantine hit, we were doing workshops at the start of this year. We were doing workshops for the community, building self-esteem, teaching people that they didn't have to fall into stereotypes, using meditation as a backdrop for that, and also Ayurveda. And as of right now, since we're online, one of our biggest things is making sure that people are building a home meditation practice. And so if you ever tune into our Instagram, Running River Collective, you'll see we do these 2-minute meditations 2 or 3 times a day.
Oh, that's awesome that you guys are doing that. And are you teaching those?
Yeah, I'm leading most of them. The main crew is there's 3 people. It's me, Quazzy, and then Trippy and Joe Ali, both native New Yorkers, and they come with their own practices. And for the most part, you'll probably see me on there leading the meditations. I usually do them sometime early in the morning. But what you get from the whole crew is a wide range of personalities and practices.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think it's really amazing that you guys are doing that. And I kind of want to catch up the space in between. So you said you started practicing in 2011 and then started teaching in 2014. Can you kind of take me through like what you were doing with your yoga career in New York between like 2014 and becoming a part of Running River Collective?
Yeah. Have you spent any time in New York, Amanda?
Like 3 weekends, that's all. But
Okay.
New York is amazing. It's an incredible city.
For sure. It's like, it's almost, I kind of find no matter what the job is, it's always a hustle. You know, no matter what you're doing, you're kind of hustling. And yoga was definitely in line with that. I was finding myself, if not on a bike or a car, on the train, just going from one studio to the next, trying to make sense of why I was paying all this rent in New York City. You know, just trying to teach enough classes where I could afford the rent and maybe get a kombucha along the way. So
Yeah.
I was, you know, yeah.
Amazing. And I guess I'm kind of curious, like, I guess I don't know much about the space in New York and kind of what the studios are like. Like, what is it like to be a yoga teacher in New York City?
Cool. It's I think my typical day and it's different for everyone, of course, but my preferred day and my typical day was usually teaching a 7:45 hot vinyasa class in Queens. I live in Brooklyn, so I'd take my car and it'd be about a 30-minute drive to the studio. 7:45 in the morning, teach hot vinyasa, and then 9:30 hot class back in Brooklyn. So just driving across the bridge, go back to Brooklyn. Probably have a couple hours to chill. Oftentimes, you just take a class at whatever studio I was at, maybe connect with some fellow colleagues, and then teach two more classes in the evening, and be home sometime around 9 o'clock.
Wow, that's a busy day.
Yeah, it's kind of the goal is kind of teach. If you could teach about 3 to 4 classes every day in New York City, financially it makes sense. So that's where it becomes a bit of a hustle, just finding enough studios to teach at, and making sure that you can stay healthy along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so are you teaching online for any of those studios right now, or how has it kind of shifted with the pandemic?
Yeah, I'm currently am teaching, and I'm pretty happy with the amount I'm teaching. I'm teaching about a class a day, Monday through Friday. Um, when the pandemic started, I was one of the people that just kind of took a back seat to collect myself, to kind of get a sense of where I was. But um, at this point in the game, it's August now, so it's been somewhere between 100 to 200 days of being at home. Um, I've been getting more in a flow. It's been on Zoom. We just started teaching in the park as of last week, and I'm telling you, that was a great experience to be around people again teaching. I kind of forgot how alive a class can be when there's actually people physically in the room with you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've definitely experienced that as well. And I mean, I'm so grateful that we work in an industry where we can do stuff online because I know there's lots of people in the wellness space, like massage therapists or PTs and stuff, that haven't been able to do a lot of work because they can't be in person and they rely on that. Yet at the same time, there's something that's really magical about like breathing with people in this space. Like, I feel like you get the magic of yoga a little bit more through that.
Yeah, I was in a park class the other day, and we're in down dog, and the teacher had us lift our left leg up, and I lifted my leg, and I seen the moon was out, and I was like, oh my god, it's like I'm really outside now. It was a great feeling.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's the little things, right? During this whole experience, it's just been the little things that have mattered so much. Hey everyone, it's time for a short break and a message from our sponsor, Offering Tree. Most yoga teachers struggle with two things: marketing and time management. It can feel overwhelming and scary to try and put yourself out there to get new clients. There's also never enough time to get everything done, like sending a newsletter, emailing your new clients, or updating your website. Fortunately, Offering Tree created a single platform that can solve all your marketing and time management headaches. With a single account, you can create a website in minutes, set up a newsletter, create a blog, schedule classes, and take payment. The great part is that all of Offering Tree's features work seamlessly together, so you don't need to pay for and manage 5 different services. Instead, you get it all in one easy, affordable package. Offering Tree also provides helpful tutorials and webinars to keep you growing as a teacher. It's part of their mission as a public benefit corporation. Offering Tree has been supporting MBOM for well over a year now, and I love their product and their company. They're providing special pricing for MBOM listeners, so if you're ready to move from overwhelm to confidence with your digital presence, then check them out at offeringtree.com/MBOM. Again, that's offeringtree.com/MBOM. MBOM. All right, now back to the episode. And so I know you've worked with a lot of different yoga studios and then also through your work with RRC. I think that a big conversation that's been happening over the last couple of months, and I mean, really, I think this conversation's been happening longer, or it should have been if it wasn't happening in more places. But I think this has been a lot about like how yoga teachers and yoga studios can make their spaces more welcoming to marginalized groups of people. So people with disabilities, people who speak other languages, BIPOC. And I'd be curious through your experience working in New York and then through RRC, like how do we start doing that as yoga teachers and studio owners?
That's a great question. That is a great question. Some things that I've seen at some studios that has seemed to have been working is really, I guess, meeting people's ability to attend classes. I know for me, a big part of being turned off to get to a place is financial, or, I would say almost always financial, whether it be the finances it takes to get to the place, let alone the finances it takes to be in the space, not to mention all the like amenities you need along the way. Because, it's never just the class, it's the mat, it's the water, maybe a towel. And, I've seen some studios that have like high drop-in rates. By high drop-in rates, I'd say, class is somewhere between $20 and $30 a session. I've seen them offer people of color classes, like I think maybe once a month or something like that, maybe once a week, I can't remember, where it was really inviting for people of color. Because I've heard in the past that a lot of times people of color feel uncomfortable being the only person of color in the room. So to have a place very intentionally set up where they're not the only person, where they feel represented both from the teacher, but also the students around them, I think has made a big impact on a lot of people.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I guess like for you, when you were first looking for yoga classes and starting to practice, like, did you feel like you were like turned off by advertisements that just had kind of, I guess people talk a lot about like the skinny white female as being like what's represented most often in yoga classes and yoga studios and yoga ads and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's interesting because I wouldn't want it to come across as if it wasn't important, because it is important. But in my experience, what happens is, being a Black man who has been, and I went to college and I've been in privileged spaces, just get kind of used to it. I didn't really expect to see anybody Black at certain places that I was going. So it definitely would have helped. But I think there's a desensitization that a lot of Black people have when they go to places that have already been kind of labeled as white spaces. I couldn't get my friends to go for the life of me, to some of these spaces I was going. And I understood that because everyone's level of comfortability being the only minority in a space is different. I always felt pretty confident about who I was and what I was bringing to a situation. So I found ways to navigate it. But I will say that having the Running River Collective host classes and seeing people that usually don't come to yoga classes actually come out has been definitely extremely rewarding for me.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's interesting to hear your experience. So thank you for sharing that. And I just feel like it's so unfortunate to think about like you just don't expect to see like other Black people there. Like I feel like that's the world that I guess we're trying to shift right now, where it's like it feels like a diverse space. And I think that a lot of people, because there are a lot of white people running yoga studios, teaching yoga, it's like they don't really know how to navigate bringing in more diversity and making people of color feel more welcome. And I feel like it's like we've kind of got to go through this sort of like awkward learning phase to kind of figure out how we do this as an industry and as individuals as well. And I love what you're talking about with, having something like a people of color class and having a studio or having, a yoga teacher who is of color run that and be able to teach that and that sort of thing. In general, like, do you have any thoughts on kind of how we start to make this industry more diverse? And, even with, it's so interesting to hear, like, from your perspective as a Black yoga teacher, not being able to get your friends to come like to your classes.
Yeah. If they were going to come to a class at all, it would be the class I was teaching. But outside of that, there was no chance. There was very little chance I could get them to practice with me.
Okay, gotcha.
If at all they were going to come to my class. But even then, I kind of had to drag feet a little bit. But I think I know what I appreciate. I appreciate people taking chances because at least it shows people try. Like I'd rather someone get it wrong and then have a dialogue about it than to not try at all, and then to kind of that's a little bit more violent, I think, actually, just to not even engage at all is a little bit worse than getting it wrong. Because I think there's something in the attempt in trying to have inclusion that allows for dialogue. And I think in that attempt, you need to make sure you have people in the room who you're advocating for have a say in it. I've seen people offer scholarships to have more people actually teaching, and I think that's a great way to build longer lasting diversity in studios. Is actually more than just having Black students or any other people of color come into the classes just to practice and leave. Actually getting them into the teaching of yoga so that they can not only maybe teach at your studio and attract people of color to come to the studio, but they also have the tools to bring yoga to their community. Maybe when they go home for Thanksgiving, they can offer some breath work to their nana, and or maybe when they're in their neighborhood, they can offer, a quick little stretch for an essential worker that works in their neighborhood. So I think in getting people on the other side, not just as a consumer, but as a producer, is going to really build some type of longer lasting impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I've been thinking about this quite a bit over the last couple of months, is just how we start doing this. And it does seem like there's a lot of people. I mean, I know a lot of people who are, let's just use like my dad, for example. My dad's like mid 50s, white male. And he's like, I just don't feel like yoga's for me. It's people who look like you in the classes, and I can't do the things that you do. And I like try to sell him on, oh, this would be a good class, or you could do this, or here's how you modify, like, let me teach you how to do this. And it's a lot of work to get, any group of people who don't feel like that practice is for them, which unfortunately is a lot of people across all different countries, all different backgrounds, all different skin colors. And I definitely love what you're saying about like having more diverse teachers, because I think that that's how you get more people in the room, because they feel like they connect to that teacher. Like they know what that teacher teaches. They feel safe there. They feel comfortable there. And so it has to start with having like a range of diversity within the teachers and what their offerings in the studio to get more people who are diverse into our classes. Or I guess just make people feel more welcome is maybe a better way to say that.
Totally. There's a group in Southside Jamaica, Queens, and for those who aren't familiar, Southside Jamaica, Queens, it's like most inner city areas that has problems, and it's a predominantly Black area. But this group, they're called the Urban Yogis. They're hosting a teacher training right now, and it's really cool to see that happening because one of the main people to help bring that was a guy named Eddie Stern, and the main people who run the Urban Yogis took his course, and they actually built their own teacher training, and now they're offering that teacher training to their community free of charge. And so now I have a few friends that are in that program. They're going to be 200-hour certified teachers in the next 3 weeks because they've been on this online course. They've been learning from the same people that they play basketball with, the same people that they turn up with, the same people who are still flexing and flaunting, and they're still their individual selves, but they're also mindful, and they're bringing these practices. They're also the ones, teaching them, how to be yogis. And I think they're bringing a validity and an authenticity to their neighborhood that maybe only they could have brought. I don't even think I could have brought it, being that I'm not from New York originally. So I think knowing your audience and also finding their voice at the front of the room has been really impactful. So I just want to shout out the urban yogis for that.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes for them, and I'm definitely going to go check them out after we hop off this call. So I'm excited to learn more about that. And I think that's you bring up something that I think is so important, and it's that it's going to be way more impactful for somebody from that community to teach yoga to that community than if like you or I went there. And it would definitely be like, if I just go in there and I'm like, oh, hey, I'm going to come bring you some yoga. Do you feel like it kind of gets into this sort of like savior mentality when people are doing things like that? Like, does it have to come kind of from the community?
That is interesting, because that's definitely a thing, the savior mentality. And I think like anything else, it's something that's ongoing. You kind of got to massage it, make sure you're applying the right amount of pressure, but not too much pressure, because the savior mentality is problematic for sure, but to not help at all might be worse. So I like what they're doing. Maybe if you can collaborate, offer authentically what and then create a way that they can take the ball and run with it themselves, I think is important. Because I know even in that neighborhood, how the Running River Collective has been supporting that neighborhood. We're offering things that I feel pretty confident that only we can offer. So if we weren't there, there'd be a missing piece. But at the same time, we're aware of our own identity, and we're sure to like keep them at the forefront, because it is their thing first. We're just there kind of supplementing and offering what our unique perspective brings.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective on that. And I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that is something that I think that people are really trying to find this balance between like, speaking up against what they believe in and, not staying totally quiet. Because as you said before, that's harmful to marginalized communities, people of color. But then also it's like, you don't want to get into the realm of like tokenism or like white savior mentality. And I like the idea of, finding communities that you feel like maybe you have something to offer, but working with people in those communities that can really be kind of more hands-on with that. So whether that's, donating money, donating time, maybe donating resources, maybe it's hiring those teachers at your studio after.
Totally finding the right mix. And I'm sure it'll be different for every group. Every group that you'll deal with, they'll want a little bit different engagement. But that's what's great thing about our field is, we're always striving to be present. So kind of picking up on people's reaction, their body language, things we already do in the class, I think is a great tool when collaborating with new groups.
And then, so something I'm kind of curious from your perspective on is this idea of, I guess, bringing diversity into our studios in terms of teachers, but then balancing that with the idea of tokenism. So I was listening to a live that was done with Michelle Johnson a couple weeks ago, and she was talking about this balance of, making sure that BIPOC is included in your studios, getting to know people, hiring them in your studios. But then it's also like, you don't want to kind of put people on a pedestal just because they're on, or not a pedestal per se. You don't want to, I guess, kind of make it like the forefront of your advertising, or like, like, oh, we have a like Black yoga teacher here, come check us out, we're so diverse. Does that kind of make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think you can I think people can kind of tell when it's real and when it's for the gram, if you will.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it feels like so awkward to say, quite honestly. Like I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I just said that out loud. Like it just feels so uncomfortable to be like, oh, we're just gonna hire this person because they're a certain color. Like to me, that just feels like, I don't know, it feels just not okay, I guess, in a lot of ways. Like, of course, we want to have people of different backgrounds and different colors, but I feel like putting somebody like kind of out there is like, oh, this is, our black yoga teacher, our Indian yoga teacher. That feels very weird to me.
Yeah, and even further, like I mean, I because I think sometimes happens is I've heard this happen, from when I was actually in high school, but a, a white mother felt her son did not get something that someone else got because he was white, and she felt that the other person got it because they were black. And in all honesty, this person was a Gates Millennium Scholar. They were, super high GPA. They went to into some Ivy League school. So this person of color was qualified. But maybe the feeling of resentment came from the mom, or whatever. But the point I'm making is a lot of times I think the person is qualified, but even if they are qualified, I still think it's a bit genuine when you put them at the forefront. It's like um, I think what's you see a lot now with studios is everyone's in a rush to get on the right side of history. So they'll be doing really good things, and it's really great that they're hiring qualified teachers of color. They're hiring a diverse staff, but then you might see that they're very quick to post about it. I had a friend and like somebody more of a mentor, really. And she does this. She does social justice work. Her name's Naima, and she's doing them for a lot of the different studios in New York. But she was telling us about a story that somebody a studio wanted to hire her to do social justice work, which is great. But before they could even get into the details of what she was going to bring them, they wanted to know if they could post it to their Instagram. You know, and in contrast to one of the studios I work at, where she did this social justice work, we didn't post it to our Instagram at all. We just hired her to do it. The staff came in and we learned from her, and there was never any show about it. And I think that's where the problem can come in. But it's also it's a slippery slope in general, because a lot of people, if they don't see it on social media, they don't believe that you're doing the work. So I think studios have to find this nice mix of doing it authentically, not doing it just for PR, but also making sure that they are actively and vocally taking a stand towards equality and diversity.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I love what you're saying and I completely agree with that. And I think, you're right. It is kind of a slippery slope, like doing the work like your studio did, where they're hiring somebody to come in and talk about diversity. I mean, I think that's like one of the best things that studios can be doing right now. And I think that there's a difference between posting like about that specific thing and taking your learnings and just being able to showcase that you are a diverse studio, like as opposed to like there's a difference between like showing and telling. I don't remember if you learned this, or I don't know if you learned this in school in like English class, but they say that like good writers will show you something as opposed to just telling you something. And I sort of feel like it's sort of a similar concept where it's like actually doing the work is showing that you're doing the work, not telling somebody. So it's not like, oh, hey, we're doing diversity training. Or like, hey, I hired somebody who's black at my studio. It's like you're just doing the work and continuing to be a great studio. And within that, it kind of shows that you are diverse.
Totally. It's like the real's gonna come out. Like if you're really doing it, they might not know today, but by tomorrow, the next day, they're gonna look and be like, wow, that person was really doing the work. That person's really because if you're really doing it, I really believe people are gonna see it.
And so, is there anything else that you feel like, just from your experience kind of in the yoga industry and then your work with RRC, that like what types of shifts should we be making in the industry to be more inclusive, to be more diverse?
I think creating a space for people to talk and genuinely creating that space is important, because what I've seen certain studios kind of miss the mark on I've been a part of in the past is they've offered solutions without actually checking in with the people that they were supposed to be helping. So it was kind of so that's when we get back into like the savior kind of mentality, kind of thinking you know what somebody needs, and then giving it to them is a little bit different than, asking them what they want and then working with them to make it happen.
Yeah, for sure. So having conversations with your students, your teachers, if you're a studio owner is I guess probably one of the best things that we can be doing right now.
Yeah, and I think anything that you can, if anything that's a problem for someone, but it's not a problem for you, I think it's important to recognize that you have a privilege there. Um, and I think it's important to also just be very transparent about spaces. I think it would be a big step for a studio to be like, hey, the majority of our student base is white, and just kind of flat out say that, like, the majority of students is white, because people already kind of expect it anyway. But I think just kind of being clear about who you already are, but where you're trying to go is important. Because one thing I've seen happen is white people tend to have the luxury of not mentioning their whiteness, and black people don't have the luxury of ignoring their blackness. And I've been in spaces where when people identify like who they are, the people of color almost always mention their race, like, I am a black man, black woman, this and that. But I've noticed white people very rarely introduce themselves as, I'm a white man. So it's kind of this erasure, or this kind of yeah, I guess it's a feeling of unseenness. And this came up in a group I was in, and then someone who's a part of the LGBTQ community was telling me how he he refers to himself as he, him, and so he oftentimes doesn't even think to mention the he him part because he thinks it's obvious. But he's got other people in his community who they don't have the luxury of being visibly seen as they want to be represented. So I think that's like these examples of, it might not be a problem for you, but it could be a problem for someone else, is what studios should address. If you're hiring a person of color, maybe check in to see how their commute is to your studio. Maybe your studio, if your studio is like maybe is the predominantly white, your class base is predominantly white, and you're in a certain part of town that has maybe predominantly white residents, maybe check in with that person of color teacher and see, what's your commute like? What kind of obstacles are in your way to get here? Are we making it accessible for you to teach here comfortably? In New York, I have some friends who are people of color. The studios that they teach at, they have to take a bus and a train and damn near a plane, and they got to
Yeah.
because it's just so out of their way. So I think working with that person, how can we get you here? How can we maybe group your class? How can we get you like maybe 2 classes that are back to back, so you can be here and then be out? Are we making it? Are we making this the most? Are we keeping it as accessible for you to get to work and do your job at a high level, as we are for the person who might live in the neighborhood and kind of roll out of bed whenever?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. That's something I live in a really small town, so that's something I hadn't thought of, but that definitely makes a difference. I mean, in a big city, especially something like New York, where traffic can be horrible during rush hour and that sort of thing, or maybe just all the time. I feel like New York literally never sleeps, so maybe just all the time. But that can really make a difference for somebody's experience working somewhere and making and having them feel like they're welcome and that they're appreciated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Amazing. I'm curious, with the studio that you worked with that did the diversity training, was that something that was really helpful to the teachers that work there? Like, is that something you would recommend for studio owners to do?
Oh, for sure. For sure, for sure, for sure. And I found it helpful. It was helpful for me. I think it was helpful for everyone involved. And if you guys want the name of the person, because she's doing them online as well, her name is Naima Afia. She is a healer, a yogi. She's a clinical psychologist. She's a social worker. She's a person of many hats, and soon to be mother. And she's just a great person overall. and she's been offering these social justice courses for multiple studios in New York, maybe to others outside of New York. I'm not sure, um, but I just find her approach to it. She's coming from a trauma informed space. She's very relatable, and I've found that she's created space to open up for people to really talk. And this is coming from people of different ethnicities, different genders, different economic backgrounds. I think it's very important because I do think, not to let anybody off the hook, but I think sometimes people just don't know, and
Mm-hmm.
people. I think even the well-to-do people are just sometimes unaware. Even me as a Black person going into the training, I learned something new about privilege and trauma because I think we all have some certain level of privilege that we need to um, accept and use as a superpower. Not so much as a shame, and definitely not as a weapon, unless the weapon's for justice, of course. But something that's actually going to be able to help someone else find their privilege, find their superpower, find their equal footing. For those that know how to spell Naima, it's Naimah, and her last name is Efia. I guess you could add the link later, but I just wanted
Yeah,
to
for
put
sure,
that there
for
for
sure.
her.
No, I appreciate that. So I'll make sure there's a link to that as well in case there's any studio owners listening who want to do that, because I think that that's so important, especially, as a white person. Like, I certainly feel like I would 100% not be qualified to have that conversation with yoga teachers that I work with. And I think that hearing from somebody who is educated and skilled in this and knows how to talk to a group of people and hold space for that, and especially coming from a trauma informed background, because there is a lot of trauma around these conversations, and it's important that there is space held so that people can feel and experience and say the things that they need to say and feel like it's a safe space for them. And so, one thing I wanted to touch on that you mentioned kind of earlier in our conversation is about the prices. And this kind of goes back to bringing more diversity and making people who are marginalized feel like they're welcome to studio spaces. And, $20 to $30 per class is obviously like great for the studio and great for the teachers to make more money. And I'm all about like people making money in this industry as a yoga teacher. However, I also hear the side of it of like, that doesn't make it accessible to all people. Do you have any thoughts on kind of how we can set our prices in a way that make it more accessible for marginalized communities?
Yeah, I do. One thing I was laughing because, like, even when I've seen the places that charge 20 a class, places that charge 30 a class, I've seen the teachers kind of get paid the same. Maybe so. If there's a studio owner that wants to raise the prices for the teachers too, if you're listening, that'd be appreciated. But
Yeah, I'm all about that.
I think if you have a class that if your class can hold 25, 30 people, and about 15 people are coming and they're happily paying the $25, $30. If you have extra spaces, if that class is going to happen anyway, well, but if you're having classes, $25, $30 classes, and they're able to hold 30 people and there's 12 people coming that are happily paying that price, then maybe offer a few spaces open for a reduced price or maybe a donation price for people that can't afford that price point. One great thing I've been seeing happen over the course of quarantine is people have been donating spaces for people of color. So I have a friend who does breath work and meditation on Fridays, and people donate that can't make the class. They donate so that someone else can take their spot, and then she gives that spot to a person of color or somebody that's currently disenfranchised in some way.
Yeah, that's a great way to go about doing that is to donate spots if you do, assuming that your studio is doing well and you've got a good amount of spots filled. Obviously, that's a little challenging right now with the 6 feet distance and stuff. And are yoga studios even allowed to open in New York right now?
No, not yet.
No,
How
not
about
yet.
y'all?
Okay. Yeah, yeah. We've been open up here since the third week of June.
Oh, wow.
So we got permission. Our stuff is done sort of similar to the US, but province by province. And so the province I live in Alberta, we moved into our stage 2 or phase 2 of reopening in the middle of June. And that included like gyms and yoga studios and stuff. So we've been open since June 22nd, but we have to keep the 6 feet in between. And they just passed a mask bylaw. So we have to have masks worn to and from the studio, just not while you're practicing.
Wow. How is that?
Yeah, it's been good. It's not busy. I mean, we were kind of worried about like, oh, what about, backlog at the desk space and people using the bathrooms. And so we put in a bunch of different kind of advisements, I guess you could say, or policies kind of to prevent anybody kind of clustering and just make sure everything was smooth. And in general, it's been people kind of like trickling in a little bit. Like I think people are still pretty comfortable just practicing from their homes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's interesting.
But
Wow, like Canada, you guys got it going on.
yeah, I mean, I also live in a town of like 15,000 people. So we've only had like 8 confirmed cases of coronavirus.
Wow. Wow.
So very, very different from where New York has been at. But yeah, I think across Canada now studios are allowed to reopen. So, and then they could just choose whether or not they're going to.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I guess with studios not being open, I guess that's not quite as much of a factor, but I think there's still ways that you can be inclusive and invite people to join online and that sort of thing. And giving away like scholarships and stuff, I think is a great way if you have a room in your teacher training or rooms in your classes to encourage people who are disenfranchised or marginalized to be able to join.
Totally. Yeah. It's almost like if you're going to bring your friend to class, I think, you might be less likely to charge your friend. You're kind of like, I'm teaching the class anyway, just hop in. Kind of treating it like that, like, just come in, just get in here.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's always that balance of like making sure that things are like, I guess, financially viable so that you can continue running classes as a studio, but then also giving opportunities to people who could really use yoga and may otherwise not be able to attend.
Exactly.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation today, Quazzy. It's been so awesome chatting with you. Is there anything else you want to share? Any business lessons you've learned or any final thoughts kind of around these topics we've touched on?
I guess the one thing I could say is people say all the time is, I think being yourself, I think it works out if you kind of do it to the fullest extent you can. I read something the other day. Somebody said, it's a little bit challenging being someone that no one has ever seen before. And I think that really put the nail on the head for me about, just self-actualization, because there's going to be so many people that you're going to borrow from. There's so many people you might compare yourself to. And it's totally understandable because, the unique person that you are has yet to exist. So I think just if people keep trusting their gut, they keep believing in the product that they're offering, and they're genuinely passionate about it. I think that's the best way to make sure it happens. I think if it's ever going to happen, it's going to have to happen with that in mind, being completely authentic with who you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm reading Glennon Doyle's book right now called Untamed. And she is talking about in one of the chapters I was just reading how when she came out and told people like, oh, I'm divorcing my husband and I'm, in love with a woman, she got a lot of opinions around it. And her kind of thoughts were like, you know what, like I'm really happy with my life. And what I would encourage you to do is to be happy with your life because how you feel about my life doesn't really matter to me. And that just hit me so much as like in this busy world where everyone's got an opinion about how everyone else is living their lives. It's like we, at the end of the day, I think need to be happy with how we're living our lives and being authentically true to who we are. And I think that that's one of the big things that will help make this world a better place.
Yeah, totally.
Amazing. So if people want to learn more about you, Quazzy, or learn about Running River Collective, where can they go to find that?
You can find us on our website, runningrivercollective.com. I would say the most accessible way to find us and the most instant way you could find us is going on Instagram at Running River Collective. We're on there every day, probably too much, honestly. And we post 2-minute meditations, like I said, every single day. So that's just a great way to make sure you're getting some type of breath, some type of intentional moments in your day, and also just a good way to connect and getting new perspective on some very classic themes.
Amazing. I will make sure there's links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been an awesome conversation.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. You as well.
Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomeyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badass.